I'm VJ Hamilton and welcome to the Autoimmune RESET, the place for you to learn how to thrive with autoimmune disease and feel empowered to take steps to transform your health to feel better than ever. You can start making changes today to improve your health. So with every episode, my mission is to share with you simple ways to up-level your diet and lifestyle with key learnings from my own journey reversing autoimmune disease and inspirational stories from those who have reset their autoimmune symptoms and are now thriving in life. I suffered from autoimmune disease for over 25 years and now I live symptom-free, and I wish the same for you as well. So thank you for being here and sharing this time with me. Now let's get started. Hello and welcome to today's episode of the Autoimmune RESET podcast. Today we're going to be talking about how to manage symptoms of long COVID with natural therapies, because long COVID is something that I'm seeing more and more in my clinic, and sometimes people don't realise that they are living with long COVID because it's quite hard to pinpoint some of the symptoms. But long COVID is a condition that develops after having COVID. And one of the conditions that I had was post-viral chronic fatigue syndrome, which is quite similar to long COVID because some of the mechanisms involved are the same, and the reason that people feel ill with long COVID is exactly the same reason that people feel ill and fatigued with post-viral chronic fatigue syndrome. And as I said, that was something that I went through as well, and I ended up having chronic fatigue syndrome for over 10 years from a virus that I had when I was about 18 years old. So it just shows how long you can live in this state if you don't do something about it. So we're going to be talking about that today. We're going to be talking about how immune dysregulation, oxidative stress, how leaky gut and a leaky lung barrier can contribute to long COVID, and how inflammatory markers like the spike protein, which is a particular protein on the COVID virus, can stimulate inflammation and can continue to stimulate an immune response even after you stop feeling the effects of having the infection. And I'll also be going through some dietary interventions that you can think about implementing if you are living with long COVID. So let's first touch on why some people are more vulnerable to long COVID, because a lot of us have had COVID. Some people have an extremely severe reaction, and that's very upsetting. And obviously a lot of people passed away from COVID who are more vulnerable. But there are also people who are more vulnerable to long COVID, and that can be due to a number of things. Often think about it as the body's terrain. And when I'm working with people who have long COVID, I'm always thinking about what was their health like before they got COVID, because I also think about that in my own health. When I was a teenager, I already had 2 autoimmune diseases at that point, and I hadn't really done anything to address them. And because of my diet and because of my lifestyle and because of my stress levels, I was more susceptible to having that effect from a virus, as most people would get a virus and fight it off and then feel better. When I had that virus as a teenager, my body did kill it off in the first instance, but then it was latent in my body and caused the fatigue over a long period of time. And that's what can happen with long COVID as well. I always think about the fundamentals when it comes to somebody's health and whether they are in place when somebody gets exposed to these types of viruses, which is what I refer to as the body's terrain. And if the body's terrain is imbalanced due to factors like poor nutrition or chronic stress or a weakened immune system, it becomes more vulnerable to these viral infections, and that's where you may experience long-term effects. So an imbalanced terrain refers to that internal environment in our body where inflammation, oxidative stress, and immune dysregulation are already present. For example, when I had post-viral chronic fatigue syndrome, I already had 2 autoimmune diseases, which was probably the result of these areas in my health being off balance, but I hadn't addressed them at that period of time. I was just living with them. And because the autoimmune diseases that I had were alopecia and psoriasis, I hadn't really used much in terms of medication. I had used some steroid creams, but I hadn't really thought about addressing the root cause. And it was a long time ago, and no one was really thinking in that way back then. But for example, someone might have a pre-existing health condition like obesity or diabetes or an autoimmune disease, and they may already have inflammation when they come into contact with the COVID virus. That's what can happen. So you can have COVID when your body is in that more inflamed state, and that means you're going to be more susceptible to having long COVID. And that's what can happen. So when I'm working with a client who has long COVID, I'm starting with understanding what their health was like before. And we can't underestimate the amount of stress as well, because that's another significant factor in determining how vulnerable you are to long COVID. Because when we are in stress, it weakens the immune system by overactivating the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, which is often referred to as the HPA axis. And that regulates the body's stress response. And when the HPA axis is chronically activated, when you're living in that fight or flight state, it disrupts immune regulation and may increase systemic inflammation. So if you have been through a stressful period, or if you're just generally living in a very stressful state, then it means that you are going to be more vulnerable to viral infections, but also to a long-term impact from those viruses, as you see in long COVID and post-viral chronic fatigue syndrome. Because when you're stressed, you are more likely to be depleted of some of these vital nutrients as well, which are extremely important in your immune health, such as magnesium, vitamin C, and B vitamins. And when they're depleted, it means again that your immune system can't defend your body against viruses and bacteria and other pathogens to make sure that you don't have any impact from those pathogens, but also that they kill them off, so you don't end up with this chronic state of inflammation, which can happen if your body hasn't fully eradicated the pathogen and it is still in your body, lying latent. And a lot of the viruses do, but we can end up with a very high viral load. And I see that happening in my clients who have quite suppressed immune systems, because often I'm either working with clients who have a lot of inflammation, and that is evident when we do, for example, a stool test, or they may be very immune suppressed, and that means that they are going to be more susceptible to these bacteria and viruses and yeast growing in their body and creating their own problem, and that can cause symptoms as well. So now let's talk about some of the underlying mechanisms of long COVID, because by understanding the mechanisms, it helps to be able to address the underlying issues with natural therapies. And one of the reasons that people will have symptoms of long COVID is that their immune system has become dysregulated. So instead of returning to that balanced state after the acute infection, the immune system remains in overdrive, causing inflammation throughout the body. And the ongoing immune activation can lead to damage in the lungs, in the brain, and in the heart. And there is, in some cases, some evidence of autoimmune-like reactions where the body starts attacking its own tissue. So it might be the case that you develop long COVID and then end up being more susceptible to developing an autoimmune disease as well, or having some organ damage or vessel damage or some damage in the body as a result of that. There's also oxidative stress, which I've talked about a lot on the podcast, but this is where there is an imbalance of free radicals against antioxidants in the body, and that can also lead to tissue damage. And when I've been working with clients with long COVID and we've done the metabolomics panel, which I often refer to as my cell health test, that will look into oxidative stress, and often it is raised when I'm working with clients who have long COVID. And oxidative stress can worsen inflammation, it can cause fatigue, and it can be linked to those cognitive issues that we often see in long COVID, where people experience brain fog, or they have memory issues, or they may just not feel as sharp as they did before. And that's a symptom that I see coming up time and time again when I'm working with clients with long COVID. And this is where antioxidants like glutathione and other polyphenols that we find in fruits and vegetables, and even things like resveratrol and curcumin, these things can really help to bring down the oxidative stress, which is being caused by the viral activation in the body, and that can help with symptoms as well. And the metabolomics panel will also look at a marker for glutathione, because glutathione can be extremely low in my clients who have long COVID, and that's not only going to affect their cellular health, but it's also going to affect their detoxification as well. And that just has a knock-on effect. It's almost like a vicious cycle. So it is really important to stay on top of this. There's also the impact of the gut and lung barrier function, because research has shown that gut bacteria have been found in the lungs of some COVID-19 patients, which just shows how having certain bacteria in the gut can then seep into the bloodstream and cause havoc in other areas of the body. It's this translocation of the bacteria that can then fire up the immune response, and you see this in things like arthritis, where bacteria from the gut can get into certain parts of the joint, and there can be toxins and food particles and other particles from the gut that can get into the bloodstream. But I just think it's very interesting that when it comes to the gut and the lungs, specifically in long COVID, there seems to be a link. And so if you have, for whatever reason, an issue with your gut, it may mean that you're going to be more susceptible to long COVID, especially if you have increased intestinal permeability, which is also referred to as leaky gut syndrome. And this concept of leaky lung is also really important, because the lung barrier is permeable, and it can, similar to the gut, become increased in permeability, and that will allow bacteria and toxins into the bloodstream from the air that you're breathing in as well, and that can also cause inflammation in the lungs. And I know a lot of clients who would come to me and they've had a chronic cough for months on end, and that is a sign of this issue with the lung barrier. And there are lots of things that you can do around that, but actually by supporting your gut health, you can also be supporting your lung health. And now let's talk about one of the main things that I see when it comes to long COVID, and that is viral reactivation. And this is a phenomenon that's getting increasing attention around long COVID, because viral reactivation happens when dormant viruses like Epstein-Barr virus or herpes simplex virus or human herpes virus 6 reawaken during or after the acute illness of COVID-19. And these viruses can remain dormant in the body for years, but when the immune system is weakened or dysregulated, for example, when you get an acute infection with COVID, then these viruses that are lying dormant in your body then become reactivated. And I know several people who have had COVID and they have developed the symptoms of glandular fever again, because there is this known reactivation when it comes to EBV. And EBV and these herpes viruses are linked to chronic fatigue syndrome as well, so there is a link there. But this reactivation can exacerbate fatigue, brain fog, and immune dysfunction, and make recovery far more difficult. And there is a test that I run in my clinic, which is a trio test for viral reactivation, and it identifies viral reactivation in long COVID. So if it is apparent that my clients long COVID symptoms may be linked to a virus that they've had from the past. And this is a really great test to do because it's going to tell us whether they've had viral reactivation after long COVID. And it looks into the Epstein-Barr virus and the herpes virus 6. And this helps to determine if any of these dormant viruses have been reactivated and are contributing to symptoms. And then we can take an approach when it comes to a health plan or a health protocol to help to reduce the amount of these viruses in the body. And that's something that I did in my own health journey. I did an antiviral protocol for 3 months. And that's when I started getting my energy back and I was able to do more for my health because I had more energy, and it just was so valuable doing that and focusing on that. And then I was able to focus on other areas when I had the energy to do so. But that was a massive changing point in my own health. And for example, a lysine, which is an essential amino acid, is well known for its ability to inhibit the replication of the herpes viruses. And that's something that I took over that 3-month protocol because lysine can reduce the viral activation by balancing arginine levels. And arginine typically will feed viruses, and that's why we need to make sure the balance of arginine and lysine is at the right amounts. And you don't want to be taking lysine long term, but it can really help from an antiviral perspective. And as with anything, it's always worth working with your health practitioner. And when it comes to any supplement, don't make the mistake of taking it for a long period of time because they work synergistically together and the balance is really important. And it's not that arginine is bad. It's just that if you are trying to rid your body of viruses, then you want to focus more on lysine because, as I said, arginine can feed these viruses as well. Now let's explore the spike protein next, because I think this is an important part of long COVID. And the spike protein, which is found on the COVID virus, is highly inflammatory and it can persist in tissues even after the virus has been cleared, and that can contribute to these long-term symptoms. So this lingering spike protein can cause persistent activation of immune cells, and that can lead to cytokine release. And cytokines are these messengers of the immune system that will tell your immune system that there is an issue and that there needs to be an inflammatory defense mechanism, which can then create this chronic state of inflammation, and that can drive these symptoms like fatigue and brain fog. And the spike protein has also been shown to damage the lining of the blood vessels. So we need to just make sure that we are on top of it when it comes to the spike protein. And there are various things that you can do around this. I really like proteolytic enzymes, and that might be something that I will consider using because proteolytic enzymes are similar to digestive enzymes. Well, they are digestive enzymes, but you will take them on an empty stomach, and that helps them to be absorbed into the bloodstream, and then they help to break down proteins in the bloodstream as well. So that might be something that I'm using with my client. But again, if you are thinking about doing anything like that, please work with your nutritionist or health practitioner to seek advice from them, because it certainly won't be right for everyone. So let's dive into the nutritional and supplement strategies that may help manage long COVID symptoms. And one of the funny things that came out of my research around long COVID is that pomegranate extract has been shown to help to reduce inflammation in COVID patients. And this was based on a study by Professor Robert Thomas, who I saw recently at a conference. And he has developed a product which contains this pomegranate extract. And the reason I found it fascinating is because when I've had COVID, I have really craved pomegranate seeds. And it's actually quite funny. I feel like when I was sick with COVID, it was the one thing that I was craving, and I would be able to eat a lot of them in one go, which, to be honest, I don't normally want to eat that many. But the studies have shown that this is extremely beneficial in fighting off COVID and can help with long COVID symptoms as well. So eating pomegranates daily is going to help protect your body from these types of infections. But also, if you have long COVID, it could be a strategy for helping with oxidative stress that is caused from COVID, but also inflammation. The other nutrient that has been shown to be effective against long COVID is N-acetylcysteine, also known as NAC, which is a precursor to glutathione. And as I mentioned earlier, glutathione is one of the body's most powerful antioxidants and again can combat oxidative stress and supports liver detoxification. So it's vital for recovery. The other thing that they found with NAC is that it has this added benefit of thinning mucus, which can help with respiratory symptoms, which often linger after COVID. And as I said, one of the complaints that I see in my clients with long COVID is this chronic cough that they have, and that's how NAC can be extremely helpful. I've also touched on the benefits of lysine, and some of the lysine-rich foods are things like fish and chicken and legumes. And one of the most potent sources of lysine is quinoa as well. And another interesting fact about lysine is it can be extremely helpful for hair growth too. So if you've listened to any of my podcast episodes around alopecia or healthy hair growth, you've probably heard me mention lysine before, because not only is it an antiviral, but it has also been shown to support healthy hair growth, and it also helps with iron metabolism. So if you find that you are anemic or you have issues with iron metabolism, then lysine can be helpful for that as well. Now, we are dealing with a virus here, even in a state of long COVID, and that's why antiviral foods can be extremely beneficial as well. And some of my favorites are garlic and ginger and turmeric, and they're well known for their antiviral and anti-inflammatory properties. Garlic contains something called allicin, and that has been shown to have broad spectrum antiviral effects, and it's something that I was eating daily when I was going through that antiviral protocol myself, and I still eat it most days because I have it in a lot of different sauces, and I'll use it to flavor quinoa or rice dishes, or even as a sauce for vegetables. So there are various ways that you can include that in your diet, but they have shown that if the garlic is oxidized, it has more of a therapeutic effect. So if you are having any type of garlic, then you are best to chop it up, leave it to one side, let it oxidize, and you are going to get far more health benefits from doing that. But ginger and turmeric are also rich in compounds that help reduce inflammation and modulate that immune response. And that's what we always want to look for, are those immune modulating foods that keep the immune system in check, especially if you have susceptibility to autoimmune disease and these inflammatory conditions like chronic fatigue syndrome and eczema. And there are many different inflammatory conditions which aren't categorized as an autoimmune condition, but we still need to focus on immune modulation when it comes to those. On top of that, foods rich in quercetin, such as apples and green tea, are also excellent for managing inflammation and supporting immune function. As the gut is kind of a key piece in this, and it's that barrier function that is particularly important when it comes to long COVID, then adding foods that are going to support your digestive health is absolutely key, and making sure that you're eating enough fiber if you are able to and you don't have any reaction to that. But I don't think many of us are eating enough fiber, especially soluble fiber, in our diet each day. And that soluble fiber is what is feeding your beneficial gut bacteria. And if we're not feeding them, then they're not going to grow. So it is worth just checking in how much fiber you're eating every day. But there is also a beneficial yeast that you might have heard of called Saccharomyces boulardii. And it can be extremely helpful in restoring your gut balance and your gut function, and it has been shown to help with that gut barrier function as well. What I have found with my clients is some people do really well with Saccharomyces boulardii and some people don't, and that's often down to whether they are generally more reactive to yeasts. And this is a probiotic, it is a yeast, and it's a beneficial yeast, but some people just do not have any tolerance to yeast, and that might be because they've had a lot of mold toxicity in the past, or they have a lot of candida overgrowth in the body, or they just generally are not very good at tolerating yeast. That's what I see in my clinical practice. I'd love it to work for everyone, but unfortunately it doesn't. But when people take Saccharomyces boulardii and they don't have that reaction, it can work really, really well. And I've seen people vastly improve their gut health through taking it. But again, it is worth working with a health practitioner, because when people do react to it, sometimes it can be quite a strong reaction. So it might not be the right thing for you. But it can help to prevent those harmful bacteria that are in the gut translocating and moving to the lungs and creating that issue with the leaky lung barrier, which you will often see in long COVID. We can't forget nutrients like zinc and vitamin D, which are extremely important in supporting the immune system. Zinc inhibits a viral replication, while vitamin D helps to modulate that immune response, as I was just mentioning. So many long COVID sufferers are deficient in vitamin D, so it is crucial to check your levels and just make sure that it is at the optimal level. And I would say for most of my clients who have autoimmune conditions, we try and get it to that higher end of the reference range, because typically people who have autoimmune conditions have genetic variations in their vitamin D genes, which means they need a higher amount because they have either issues moving vitamin D around the body or actually issues utilizing it at the cellular level. So having a little bit more can really help with that. But again, if you want to do any form of genetic variation testing, which are called single nucleotide polymorphisms, then I do offer a range of genetic testing at the Autoimmunity Nutritionist. So if you'd like to hear more about them, then feel free to get in contact with me. And then to finish, I just wanted to emphasize the importance of sleep, because at the beginning of the episode, I talked about your body's terrain and why, when that is in balance, that can make you more susceptible to these types of viruses. And I think sleep is a major factor in that. So when you are sleep deprived, you are far more likely to be susceptible to an infection in the first place, but also to have this long COVID impact in your body when you are not getting enough sleep, because poor sleep can worsen immune dysregulation, it can increase oxidative stress, and it can elevate inflammation, all things that are factors in long COVID as well. And the thing is, during your sleep, your body goes into repair mode. It helps to clear out toxins, it regulates your immune system, and it helps to balance inflammation as well. So if you have long COVID, getting restorative sleep is one of the most important ways to reduce symptoms. And it would be my number one priority. And it is the one thing that I would prioritize when it comes to COVID, because a lack of sleep can exacerbate fatigue, it can increase cognitive dysfunction, and again, it can contribute to immune imbalances. In fact, one study showed that poor sleep can increase the production of those inflammatory cytokines and worsen the overall inflammatory response. So it's absolutely key. Now, there are many reasons why people have issues with sleep, but I just wanted to go through a couple of ways that you can improve your sleep quality, especially if you have long COVID. One of them is making sure that you have optimal magnesium levels, because magnesium helps to relax the nervous system and improve sleep quality. And even now, I take magnesium glycinate on a night to help calm my body, and it really helps me get into that restorative deep sleep. The other thing that you can do is you can use blue light blocking glasses, and that is just going to block all the blue light from phones and computers and screens in the evening, because that blue light can really disrupt your sleep and your body's production of melatonin, which is absolutely key for getting to sleep and getting a good night's sleep as well. So just putting those blue light blocking glasses on when it gets dark outside can really help. The other thing you can consider using is a weighted blanket, because that can help to stimulate this deep pressure on the body, and it's been shown to help calm down the nervous system and reduce anxiety. Because when it comes to sleep, it's not just about getting to sleep, it's about calming down your nervous system so you can get into that deep restorative sleep, which you will need if you have long COVID. Another thing that you could try is lowering your body temperature before bed, because that has been shown to improve sleep quality. So even having a cold shower or even lowering the thermostat in your bedroom can make a significant difference. And I know if I've had the heater on in a night, I sleep so badly, because your body naturally lowers its core temperature as it prepares for sleep. So sleeping in a cooler environment will support that process and mean that you get better sleep. And lastly, consistency is so vital when it comes to your sleep. Going to bed and waking up at the same time every day can help to regulate your circadian rhythm, which is crucial for deep restorative sleep. And it's also helpful to have the same routine before going to bed every night, so your body knows that you are about to go to sleep. And that can really help to improve your sleep quality as well. I've been tracking my sleep for over 4 years now using my Oura Ring. And I found that when I do the things that I've just explained to you, they all have such a huge impact on my sleep and really improve my sleep quality. And I've seen the same for my clients as well. So just remember, your body thrives on routine, and consistency can really help to optimize your internal clock. So I hope you found today's episode helpful. We've touched on various ways to manage COVID by addressing immune dysregulation, oxidative stress and inflammation, and discuss a number of ways through nutrition, like supplements like lysine and NAC. Focusing on your sleep can really help to promote recovery and improve your life, because it's not easy living with long COVID or any type of chronic fatigue syndrome. I've been working with clients where this has had a significant impact on their quality of life, to the point that they're not able to work or do things with friends and family. And by making these changes to your diet, by addressing the underlying root cause, it can make such a huge difference. And when I see my clients turn their health around and they're able to start feeling like themselves again, it is so rewarding, and it just makes me so happy, because I've been there. And when I had chronic fatigue syndrome, I stopped feeling like myself. My brain wasn't working anymore. I was having to cancel lots of different plans and let people down, and it just didn't feel good, but I just had no other option. So if you do need any support around this, or you have any questions, feel free to pop over to my Instagram account at the Autoimmunity Nutritionist, or you can join my free group, the Autoimmune Forum. It's a group of individuals who have autoimmune disease and chronic illness, or they're going through the diagnosis process, and we're all there to support each other. I'm sharing healthy recipes, lots of information around these types of conditions and ways that you can manage them as well. So I'd love to see you over there. You'll find the link to that in the show notes, and I'll also pop the link in there if you want to find out more about my services and how we might be able to work together. If I don't hear from you, have a fantastic rest of your week, and I'll speak to you soon. Take care. Thank you very much for joining me today on the Autoimmune Reset. I really hope you enjoyed the discussion, and be sure to subscribe to the podcast so that you never miss an episode. And if you liked it, I would hugely appreciate a review on iTunes, as it helps me understand what you like about the podcast and to help share the information with more people. I'm excited to speak to you next time, and remember, you have the power to take the reins on your health. So keep the faith and celebrate the small wins. Until next time.